They found her in the rubble with her fingers closed around it. Sergeant Dara Osi was the one who spotted the hand first. Not her hand, pale and stone grey and fused into the limestone like it had always been there, like the mountain had grown around it over 100 million years, just to offer it back to whoever came digging. He'd been on the excavation crew at Site 19 for 11 weeks. He had stopped expecting to find anything interesting in the Malin Basin. He had certainly stopped expecting things that looked back at him. He called for the medics before he called for anyone else. That was instinct. Civilian contractor Mara Solis, 26, had taken the blast radius wrong and caught a slab of limestone to the back of the skull. She was breathing. Her left hand, even unconscious, had the grey stone object in a grip that the medics couldn't break without risking her fingers. "Leave it," said the site supervisor, a slow-spoken man named Brecht, who had the face of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. "She'll let go when she wakes up." She didn't let go when she woke up. She didn't let go for 3 days. And by the 3rd day, Mara Solis had stopped being someone who needed to let go of anything, because Mara Solis, in all the ways that mattered, was no longer home. The object came to the attention of Dr. Yale Gross at the university's xenogeology unit by accident. A grad student named Portu had photographed the stone hand at the hospital. Clinical documentation, nothing dramatic, and the image had ended up in an email chain that somehow threaded through 4 departments and landed in Yale's inbox attached to the subject line. Weird rock sample. Yale was not someone who could leave a weird rock sample unopened. She looked at the photograph for a long time, then she made a call. "It's silicon-based," she said. "I can tell from the crystalline striations in the metacarpal region alone. That is not calcium carbonate. Whatever fossilized this was not a geological process we have a name for." The man on the other end of the line was Dr. Adewale Nkemdirim, her department head, and he had a voice like weathered oak and twice as many degrees as she did. "You're saying it's not from here. I'm saying it's not from any geological period we have a name for either. The stratum it came out of is Jurassic. The object is not Jurassic. The object is not from any period on this planet." There was a long pause. "And the woman holding it." Yale looked at her second monitor, where the hospital's shared file sat open. Mara Solis, responsive but uncommunicative, vital signs nominal, repeating a phrase in a language that didn't match any entry in the hospital translator's database. "The woman holding it," Yale said slowly. "Keep saying something. The staff think it's garbled. I had a linguist friend listen to the recording. And? It's not garbled, it's structured. It's a language, and the only word my friend could pass out, the only one that seems to repeat with consistent phonetic stress, sounds like a name." She paused. "She keeps saying it must live." They moved the object, and by extension Mara, to the university's containment facility under the cover of a quarantine notice. It was easier than explaining the truth. The truth was the kind of thing that required about 6 hours of preamble before anyone would stop looking at you like you'd lost your mind. Yale did the preamble anyway, to anyone who would sit still long enough. "Silicon-based life," she said for the 4th time that week, to 4 people who all had the same careful expression people get when they're trying to decide if they need to call someone. "It's not theoretical. We've been expecting it as a possibility for decades. Carbon chauvinism, the assumption that life must be structured the way ours is a documented cognitive bias in xenobiology. Silicon can form long-chain molecular structures. It can carry information. It can turn a geologist into a puppet," said Brecht from the back of the room. He'd followed them from Site 19. Nobody had officially invited him. Nobody had asked him to leave either. He sat in the chairs the way a man sits when he has decided this is now his problem, whether he wanted it to be or not. Whatever it did to Mara. "That's what you're dancing around, yeah?" "We don't know the mechanism," Yale said, "but it happened." "Yes, and she took it to... Where'd she go?" "The power relay station outside Malin." She broke into Substation 4. The on-site security footage shows her carrying the object into the main distribution corridor. She placed it against the primary transformer housing. Yael pulled up the image. The still frame showed Mara Solis in her dusty fieldwork jacket, face absent of anything recognizable as Mara Solis, pressing a grey stone hand against an electrical conduit the way a person presses a palm to a wound. The station logged power drain of approximately 400% of standard output in the 90 seconds before the fire suppression system activated. She fed it electricity, Brecht said. It fed itself electricity. She was the delivery mechanism. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the reinforced window, Mara Solis sat in a white chair in white light and said the same phrase over and over to the empty air in front of her. "The object," said a woman named Dr. Liane Park, who ran the facility's biophysics lab and had the specific kind of calm that comes from too much coffee and not enough sleep. Same size it was when it came out of the quarry. The photographic record is clear. The metacarpal region has a new growth. It was 4 fingers when they photographed it on site. She tapped the image. It's 5 now. Nobody said anything. "It's growing," Liane said. "Whatever it is, it's using the energy. It's building itself back." They called for a containment protocol. They got half of one before the second puppet showed up. His name was Tariq, and he was a technician at the university's power distribution hub, and he had taken a different route home on a Tuesday evening and passed through the corridor where the containment unit was located, and now he walked with the gait of a man whose strings were being managed by something that had not yet learned to imitate human movement well enough to fool anyone who looked carefully. He carried the object cradled in both arms like something precious. He walked toward the nuclear research reactor at the north end of the campus, and he did not stop walking, and the 3 security personnel who tried to intercept him found themselves with a problem they had not trained for, that stopping a human being from walking somewhere, when you don't want to hurt that human being, is genuinely difficult if they don't respond to any of the normal deterrents. He got to the reactor. He placed the object at the base of the cooling column. And then something extraordinary happened, which was that the object stopped looking like a stone hand and started looking like a hand. Yale was in the monitoring room. She watched it on 4 different screens. The stone surface sheened over and became something translucent, something that caught the radiation output of the reactor the way a plant catches sunlight. With a kind of structural intentionality, a reaching, the fingers spread. Something passed through the wrist joint that looked almost like a pulse. Tariq collapsed. Whatever had been using him let go. He hit the floor and lay still, and the medics later reported he had no memory of the previous 6 hours and a headache that lasted for 4 days. In the monitoring room, Yael said very quietly, "It doesn't need them anymore." "What?" said Liane beside her. "It has enough. Whatever energy threshold it needed, it's past it now. It let Tariq go because it's done with intermediaries." She stared at the screen. The hand had begun to move, not the twitching of something mechanical. The deliberate, considered movement of something alive. "We are no longer watching a fossil." Liane's hand found her arm and gripped it, not hard. Just the grip of someone making sure another person is still real. "What do we do?" Yale didn't answer immediately, because she was watching the hand turn over palm upward, the way a person's hand turns over when they are deciding to look at something. The radiation counter on the secondary screen was spiking in a way that should have been triggering alarms, but the alarms had been routed through the same hub that Tariq managed, and Tariq was currently unconscious on a different floor. "We figure out what it wants," Yale said, "and we figure out if that's something we can talk about." The form that emerged from the reactor chamber 3 hours later was not a hand anymore. It was a woman, or the shape of one, tall, crystalline pale, moving with an economy of motion that suggested a body still learning the physics of the gravity it was standing in. The silicon substrate had restructured itself into something bipedal, functional, and looking at the world through eyes that processed input in the ultraviolet range, which meant that when she looked at Yael, she was seeing something Yael could not quite imagine. She said her name. It was unpronounceable in any language that used a human tongue, but she offered a translation. Eldris. She said it the way someone says a name that's been theirs for longer than the planet they're standing on has been habitable. You speak our language, Yael said. Not a question. I have been inside your people's heads, Eldrius said. Her voice had harmonics in it, sound at frequencies just below what felt comfortable, like the resonance of a very large bell. Your language is a simple system. I have had more complex ones. Our people, Yael said carefully, include the woman who's been in hospital for 3 days and the technician you left on a floor. They are unharmed. A pause. I was careful, as careful as the process allowed, the process of controlling them like instruments. Another pause. Eldrius turned her head slightly, the way a person tilts their head when recalibrating an expectation. I was sentenced to destruction by my own people. My physical form was shattered across a planet I no longer remember the name of, buried in strata I could not escape from without help. I took the help that was available. Two people who are alive. I have destroyed things, human. But not today. Yael held that thought in her mind for a moment, the weight of it, the complicated shape of it. Here was a thing that was ancient and powerful and had used human beings as tools. Here was also a thing that had just drawn a line. She had been practicing science long enough to know that the most important data was often the data that didn't fit the model you'd already built. Where do you come from? She said. Eldrius told her. It took 4 days of conversation to understand even the outline of it. Castria, she called it the cold world. The word for it in her own language is something closer to the world that chose to die. Had been a planet of silicon life, millions of years old, a civilization that had built things in crystal and mathematics and light. Eldrius had been their greatest engineer. She had built the solar barriers that kept the planet livable against the wind off their dying star. She had also tried to take power from the people who held it, and failed, and been sentenced for it, not for the engineering, but for the coup. In the last recordings from Castria, the remaining leadership offered her people a choice between extinction and a diminished life underground, in bunkers, in hiding. Her people had chosen extinction. They had destroyed the gene banks that would have allowed the species to continue. They had done it to spite her, she thought. Or perhaps because they were too proud. Or perhaps, and here her voice took on a quality that Yael could only call grief, because they were tired. You wanted to go back, Yael said. To rebuild. I wanted to give them a future they refused to take. Eldrius was quiet for a moment. She was standing at the window. Outside, the campus was ordinary. Students with coffee cups, pigeons on ledges, someone's bicycle locked to a railing that was not technically a bicycle rack. There is no future to give anymore. I checked. I know the coordinates. I know the time. There is no one left to save. So what happens now? Eldrius turned from the window. Her face in the light was not quite human, but not alien in the way Yael had expected. Not monstrous, not cold, just different. The expression it was currently wearing was something Yael recognized with a small jolt. The look of someone who has just understood that they have nowhere to go back to. The look of the last person in a room after a party has ended. I don't know, Eldrius said. This is new. The military arrived on day 6. They had, in fairness, been patient. The university's administration had called them on day 3, and they had spent the intervening period doing the kind of very serious preparatory work that organizations do when they're trying to decide whether something is an asset, a threat, or both. The officer in charge was a colonel named Harstad, and she had the specific quality of good leaders in impossible situations, which was that she asked questions before she gave orders. She sat across from Yael in the facility's conference room and listened to the full briefing without interrupting. And when it was done, she said, "Does it want something from us?" Yael said. She hasn't made any demands. She hasn't threatened anyone. She's been answering questions for 4 days. That's not the same as not wanting something. No, Yael agreed. She wants to not be alone. I think that's the most accurate summary I can give you. Colonel Harstad looked at her for a long moment, and the two people she controlled, both back at work. Tariq said, and I thought this was interesting. He said he wasn't frightened during it. He didn't feel like something was taking him. He said it was more like being very, very focused on something, and then less focused, and then it was over. That's a remarkably generous interpretation. He's a remarkably generous person. Yael paused. The object had enough power of its own to influence human neurochemistry from a distance. She didn't use more than she needed to. She didn't hurt them. She could have. She set down her pen. I am not making a moral argument for her. I'm giving you the data as I have it. Harstad nodded slowly. I want to talk to her. Eldrius received the colonel with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Total. She listened to the official position that her presence on Earth represented an unprecedented situation requiring assessment, and said, I understand. You don't know what I am. You don't know what I'll do. And you cannot defend against me effectively, which makes this conversation one you are having from a position of significant disadvantage, and you are having it anyway. Harstad, to her credit, didn't flinch. That's an accurate summary. You are the third species I have had this conversation with. The first two did not begin from a position of disadvantage. They assumed strength before they had established understanding. A pause. This did not help them. What happened to them? They tried to destroy me before the conversation was finished. Eldrius tilted her head. You have not done that. I haven't ruled it out. I know, I can tell. This is also interesting about your species. She said this without irony, which was somehow more unsettling than irony would have been. You will consider destroying something you are simultaneously curious about. You will hold both positions in parallel and not experience it as a contradiction. Harstad was quiet for a moment. Most people would call that being practical. My people would have called it being unresolved. We resolved things. One way or another, we always resolved them. Something shifted in her expression, not enough to name clearly. The resolution we chose in the end was final. Looked at her for a long time. And you want something different? I want. Eldrius stopped. The word had come out with a quality that surprised her, Yael thought, watching from the corner of the room. Like she hadn't been expecting to say something that simple. I want to be useful. I built things. I was very good at building things. My planet is gone. But there are other cold worlds, other barriers that need building. And your species, she looked at Yael and then back at the colonel, has not yet built them. They sent a probe to the Castrian coordinates. It came back with images of a dead world. Crystal tundra, atmosphere stripped, not a single organic signature on any scan. But in the deep subsurface, 22 kilometers down, behind a wall of collapsed geology, the probe's ground-penetrating radar found something. A chamber, intact, sealed. The race bank that the old recordings said had been destroyed was not in fact entirely destroyed. Eldrius looked at the radar image for a very long time without speaking. Some of them weren't willing, she said. Someone kept something back. Her voice was completely level, which was how Yael knew it was costing her something. Someone thought it was worth keeping. Can you get to it? Not alone, not from here. She set the image down, but I know what needs to be built. I have known for 150 million years what needs to be built because I built the first version, and I have had a very long time to improve on the design. She looked up. The question is whether you will help. Yael thought about Mara Solis, 3 days unconscious in a hospital bed, and Tariq with his 4-day headache, and the strange thing that had come out of the limestone with its hand closed around an impossible future. She thought about what it meant that someone on a dead planet had hidden a locked room full of the last of their kind and waited for 150 million years for someone to come and find it. She thought about the specific human instinct, the one Eldrius had found interesting, the one that held two contradictory things in parallel without collapsing, the instinct to both fear something and reach for it at the same time. That's not my call, Yael said, but I'll make the argument. She made the argument for 6 weeks. She made it in conference rooms and committee hearings and one very memorable video call with 3 different agencies that had 4-letter abbreviations and strong opinions. She brought Brecht, who had a bluntness that cut through institutional caution the way a shovel cuts through limestone. She brought Dr. Lyon Park, who had the data. She brought Colonel Harstad, who had the authority, and who had become, quietly, in the way people become things without quite deciding to, someone who thought Eldrius was something worth taking a risk on. The argument was simple. A silicon-based engineer who had survived for 150 million years in a fossilized state, who had been precise enough in her manipulation of human neurology to do it without harm, who had asked for cooperation instead of taking it, was describing something that could be built. A barrier, a shield around a world. The technology to do it did not exist in human hands. It did exist in hers. "We don't know that she's telling the truth," someone always said. "We don't know that she isn't," Yael always said back, "and the question isn't whether we can prove her intentions from the outside. The question is whether we're the kind of species that makes a decision based on fear or based on evidence." She got the funding on a Tuesday in March, 8 weeks after she'd started asking. The installation took 11 months. Eldrius designed, humans built. It was not a clean process. There were miscommunications that came from the fact that Castrian engineering concepts didn't map neatly onto human physics terminology, and human construction timelines didn't map neatly onto the attention span of something that had waited 150 million years for anything at all. There were arguments. There was one spectacular row between Eldrius and a structural engineer from the northern team that ended with the engineer saying, "You could just do it yourself if you know so much," and Eldrius saying, with perfect tranquility, "I am aware. I am trying not to." Which was the moment, Yael thought, that most of the construction crew stopped being afraid of her. She ate, because it turned out her reconstituted form needed something. Not human food, but a specific mineral compound that the geology department was able to synthesize, and which she consumed in small crystalline amounts each morning with a ritual solemnity that looked almost like prayer. She learned to whistle. It was Tariq who taught her. He'd shown up at the facility one day, 3 months in, with coffee for everyone and the kind of sheepish goodwill of someone who has decided the best response to being temporarily puppeted by an ancient alien consciousness is to make friends with it. He whistled an old tune his grandmother had taught him, something wordless and cheerful, and Eldrius listened to it with her ultraviolet eyes half closed, and then produced a reasonable approximation of it from somewhere in her thoracic structure, and Tariq laughed so hard he spilled his coffee. Mara Solis came to installation site twice. The first time she stood outside for 20 minutes and left. The second time she went in. She and Eldrius sat in the same room for an hour and didn't talk about what had happened, or talked around it, which is sometimes the same thing. Mara left looking like someone who had put a thing down she'd been carrying for a long time. On the last day of construction, Yael stood at the primary relay terminal with the activation sequence on the screen in front of her and thought about the quarry at Site 19, the limestone rubble, the hand. She thought about the fact that something had waited longer than recorded human history, longer than the species that built it had existed, for someone to pick it up, and that the someone had been a 26-year-old geologist in dusty overalls who hadn't expected to find anything interesting that day. She thought about what Eldrius said once in a quiet moment. "Your species does not know what it will survive yet. You keep discovering it," she ran the sequence. The barrier field came up across the upper atmosphere in a slow unfurl, visible from the surface as a faint aurora, not threatening, not the harsh shimmer of military technology, but something with the quality of natural light, the way the northern sky sometimes turns colors that seem almost to breathe. The monitoring stations registered it across 6 continents simultaneously. Eldra stood beside her at the terminal and watched the readouts resolve. "Is it what you designed?" Yael asked. "Better," she said it without pride. Just the flat satisfaction of an engineer looking at a problem solved. There are 3 redundancies the original Castrian design didn't have. Your team added them. Brecht suggested 2 of them. I know. I will tell him they were correct suggestions. He'll be insufferable. Yes. And there it was. The thing that had been growing in the 11 months of arguments and mineral compounds and whistling lessons. Something in Eldrius's expression that was not quite a human smile, but had found its own shape, its own register. Something that said, I know this person. I know what this means. He already is. The ceremony was small. Nobody wanted a spectacle. There was a dinner. Tariq brought food from 3 different cultures and arranged it on long tables with the dedication of someone who believes feeding people is a serious act. Brecht gave a speech that was 4 sentences long and included the phrase, good enough is good enough, which was the highest praise he knew how to give. Dr. Park showed the data, barrier integrity, atmospheric readings, the long-range models that suggested the thing would hold for at least 2 centuries without maintenance. Colonel Harstad found Yale by the window. What happens now, the colonel said. She stays. For a while, Yale watched the faint shimmer in the sky above the tree line, the barrier, catching the last of the evening light. There are 6 other installations she wants to design. Different protection vectors. She says we've barely started. And you believe her? Yale thought about the sealed chamber 22 kilometers under the surface of a dead world, and the expedition that was being organized to reach it, and the question of whether what was inside was still viable, and what it would mean if it was. She thought about 150 million years of patience, about a hand closed tight around the only future left to it, waiting in the dark for someone careless enough to go digging. Yeah, she said. I believe her. Outside, one of the grad students had started a fire in the courtyard's small pit, the kind of fire that isn't for warmth so much as for the gathering of people around something bright. Eldrius was sitting near it, at the edge of the light, and Tariq was there, and Mara, who had come, in the end because she decided to, and a dozen others, and someone had a guitar, and the night was the particular quality of night that comes after something difficult has been done. Yale went outside. She sat down near the fire. Above her, in the dark, the barrier held.